This video is brought to you by YTAndrewPaul Tech Repairs. If you have a console, laptop, computer or Macbook in need of repair in the UK or the EU, then have a look in the description below this video for details on how to contact us in order to organise your repair. Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's video. And today we're going to be taking a look at this. This is a Xbox One S console that somebody sent in. They've had a go at replacing the HDMI port themselves, and I don't think it's gone terribly well. And they've sent it in here for us to take a look and see if we can't finish the job, so to speak. Essentially, this was sent in. I'm not sure if it's a viewer who sent it in, or if it's just somebody who's stumbled across my email address or Facebook page or whatever. But essentially, it's I think it's the guy's grandson that it belongs to, and then he's had a go at replacing the port because the port was physically damaged, and like I said, I don't think it's gone particularly well for him, so he sent it in here for me to have a second glance at, if you like. So here we are, and if we take a look, well, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. To be fair, it's one of these where I have a mantra. It's fear the worst and hope for the best. And if you do that, you won't be too far disappointed. So when it turns up and it's a mess, you look at it and you go, but at least in this particular instance, I'm taking a look at it, I'm thinking, well, yeah, it could be better, but it could be worse. So, yeah, I think we probably should be all right. So I'm just going to take a look off camera because I can't get it underneath the microscope to take a look. Physical front of the port itself, that looks okay. I think it would be nice if we could get it a little bit flatter. It just seemed to be sort of sat slightly drunkenly, but not by a lot, to be honest. And then we can take a look and see what we've got pin-wise and see if we can't get this back up and running somewhat easier than the guy himself might have managed. So as you can see here, we've pulled a couple of traces right out. So these here, this is the TMDS lines. So we've got 0, 1, 2 and clock, if I remember rightly. So the clock TMDS line, that's essentially the differential signal, is missing completely. We have one of the 0 pair missing here completely. The rest of it just isn't soldered. Look, I can wiggle each pin in turn. Yeah, not particularly great. So yes, as I say, we've got one of the 0 pair missing. We've got both clock pairs missing. That is 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, pin 14, which is not used. So that is not of concern that that's missing. And that's, I think there's a pad under there. Just about. Yes, there is. And then we've got pin 17, which is ground. 18 is 5 volts. That's there. Yes, it is, I believe. I can see just about see something there. And 19. So yeah, not too bad at all, really. In fact, I bet with a bit more persuasion, this guy could have had a little bit more joy with this. But that's not to say this is going to be the only fault that we're going to find today. So let's have a look. So as far as I'm aware, from what I remember, I would have to dig the emails out, but it's a bit of a strange one because as the guy's emailed me, he's changed the subject, the title of the email, so I couldn't tell you what. But either way, from what I remember, it was the guy's grandson's machine, and the port was physically damaged somehow. Hence the replacement. And I think that's the important thing to remember with these, is that unless that HDMI port is physically defective, then you know, it's probably okay. Some people just replace the port because they've got no image. Some people replace the port because, oh, I've got no picture, it must be the HDMI port, but it's not. There's a whole host of things it could be. If the port is physically okay, chances are that port is going to be perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable, and your issue is going to be elsewhere. So that's one to keep in mind. One trick I do like to give people for doing this kind of thing is to try and boot the console to troubleshooter. So if you've got no image on your Xbox, try and boot your image to the troubleshooter. And essentially what that does is, once you hold the button combination, you'll get the initial power up tone when you hit the power button, and then after sort of 10-15 seconds or so, you should end up with a second power up tone. Okay, and then if you do, then that means that your console is attempting to boot to the troubleshooter, which means that if you've got a black screen at that point, then yeah, your HDMI circuit is probably going to be at fault. Now, whether that's the port itself or whether that is the retimer or redriver, depending on whether you've got a 1S or a 1X, is, then the job to find out, really. Like I say, if the port is physically intact, then it's probably going to be fine. Any issue is going to be elsewhere. But if it turns out the port is good, then it's probably a retimer redriver. If the port itself is physically damaged, then hey ho, you've got your issue. If, however, everything else is fine and you don't get the second power up tone, it just sits there dead as a doornail for a while until you try to turn it off, and then if it won't shut down, it just sits and pulses the power light at you forever and a day till you pull the power. It's fairly safe to say you've got a bad hard disk drive, and then obviously you can go and replace as needed from there. So that's just a really quick tip for troubleshooting these really quickly, and hopefully that'll save you having to replace a HDMI port that you don't need to swap, because the thing is, if you start swapping components willy-nilly without really thinking about it, or without applying a little bit of troubleshooting, you can find yourself in a position where you've got a dead hard drive and a dead HDMI circuit, whether it be a knackered HDMI port, or you've not replaced the HDMI port properly, or you've got a blown encoder and that was your problem all along. So, it can soon get a bit daft, and you can start introducing more problems than you started with. And that's not really where you want to be. So they're just going to try and sit this port a little bit flatter in the board. It was certainly sort of leaned over to this right hand side as you're looking at it. So anyway, seems okay now. So we'll go with that, I think. We'll go with that. Right. Yeah, that's nicer now. So the port itself that's been put on looks absolutely fine, looks okay. So we've got basically none of this is soldered up. So that is our next job, is to take a look at this and see if we can't get it soldered. So in order to do that, we need to do some work to prepare this to get our link wires run. And in order to do that, we are going to have to scrape back some of this trace here. I don't think there's much of a trace left up here, is there? Is there? Oh, there's a little bit there. There's a little bit there. Oh, it's not too bad then. So we can go to there. That's the other side. So be careful not to sort of branch over there. But we should be all right to link into there, I think. And then our TMDS clock, well, that's ripped off all the way down to the EMI filter. Soldering to them is a right git as well, so we'll look forward to that. But the rest of the pins themselves, apart from pin 14, look to be intact, and that's fine. We're not too bothered about pin 14 in all honesty. So just gonna scrape away at this trace a little bit more just to give me a decent enough contact area to get a solid wire connection into there. As you can see, there was a little bit of it exposed there, but the trouble is on that little bit, it's not going to put up with too much aggro as far as getting pushed and pulled about goes. So there we go. And then down here, to be honest, there's not really a lot you can do, but we'll just sort of have a quick go on these pins. Right, and then that should be it really, as far as that goes. So what we'll do is we'll try and resolder this now. See, like I say, with a little bit more conviction, this guy might have actually managed to get this going again. But I can kind of see that if it's really not something you're used to, that you might look at this and go, you know, because he did mention on his emails something about the pads. He thought he'd lifted. Well, he said he thought he'd lifted them all. To be honest, from what I remember thinking, that the way he was describing it, it was pretty bad. But in the end, actually, from what I can see here, it's really not all that bad, really, from what I can tell. Okay, and I'm just going to clean this tip off, and then we'll go and we'll run back over them again. So because we've flattened this out now, these pins are actually flat to the board as well, whereas before they were slightly, as I say, it did have a little bit of a tiny bit of a drunken lean to it. A couple of these pads are a little bit loose as well. I can sort of see I can see them moving. I can see them moving as I run the iron back and forth. So I'm trying to be really careful here. I don't want to start yanking at them if I can help it, because that's when they're going to come out and they're going to make a mess. So these may very well walk about a little bit when we try and push them, but we should see the trace try to go with them in the end, providing we're good. Now then, I really do need a new work mat in here, because this is a work mat I bought ages ago. It's too big for the table, because it was designed for way back when I was in the old office with the bigger tables. But secondly, it's supposed to be heat proof, and it just isn't. It sort of crinkles up whenever the heat goes anywhere near it, and then it sort of interferes with the camera and my positioning, which is not ideal. It's not ideal for you, and it's not ideal for me. So I could do with getting a new one. So that one there is one we're going to have to rebuild. That one there is one we're going to have to rebuild. The ground's intact there, that's good. That's another one we're going to have to rebuild. There's the TMDS clock. That is pin 14. 15's good. 16's good. 17 is good. 18 seems pretty fine. And so is 19. So yeah, those are fine. It's just a case of rebuilding those missing pins. So that's the next job. So for those of you who've seen me do this before, you'll know what my trick is here. And for those of you who haven't seen me do this before, then stay tuned. So rebuilding these actually isn't quite so bad, because the tracers do run up to the port. It's not like the PS4 where the tracers kind of run off all over the place and that they get ripped out like, you know, a good sort of inch further back up the board. Well, these just kind of hang around fairly close by to the port, which makes rebuilding them, you know, a fair bit easier, which is nice. It's what we like. So I'm just going to swap my tip. I've just tinned a little bit of enamelled wire, and we've already tinned up the wire. So this should be fairly easy if I can get this into position. Now then, this is where ideally you need a pair of tweezers. Okie doke, that is the first one done. So I'll just give this a wiggle. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to need some IPA. So I'm going to wander off and find my IPA because it's not on my desk. Okay, so I've got the IPA. I've also managed to dig the tweezers out, which, you know, will be quite useful. So I'm just going to rub this little bit back. Okay. So what we've got there is, what I like to do is slide the wire up alongside the pin, and then when you tack it in position, you've got the whole side of the pin to support the wire, which makes a nice connection. And then we've just joined it onto this trace that we've tinned, and everything's nice and strong there. So that's absolutely fine. And as I say, because these are quite long contacts, the traces that run underneath the HDMI port are quite long. So what happens is when you tear them out, what tends to happen is it lifts the pad, but the traces themselves tend to survive quite well. So more often than not, you tend to find that if it does pull, it sort of only pulls back to here. So it doesn't pull any worse than the PS4 does, but because the PS4's only got tiny pads, it tends to pull the whole trace, which then means that rather than sort of getting away with just doing a really tiny little bridge wire, you end up having to run, you know, wires everywhere, and they're just a pain in the backside, which is why I say these aren't really all that bad to do, but the PS4 is a bit of a nightmare. And that's why, to be honest. So we've got these next two here. And as you can see, they run down to this EMI filter. So essentially, these are just coils that run from here to here, essentially. So you've got two pairs on each side and a ground in the middle. So you've got one pair here, another pair here, ground, one pair here, and one pair here. So, you know, top pin should read to bottom, but it shouldn't read across left to right. So if you ever need to test them out, there you go. What you can do if you're really stuck is you can bridge them across, so you can run, you know, wires straight up the traces. You'd have to worry about the grounds, but, you know, the 4 signal pins you can just run up. You can bridge them across with wire if you're at an end. I never recommend doing that with customer boxes. Always replace the parts on a customer box. But if it's your own and you don't really care, it doesn't make a difference, to be perfectly honest with you. So just do what you have to do. If it's your own box and you don't really mind. Okay, so I'm going to get another length of wire, and I've tinned it, and I'm going to come back up here, and I've got some flux on the end of the wire as well, so I'm going to need to make sure I get the right one. Again, I'm not using the tweezers because I'm an idiot, really, more than anything, but it would certainly make this easier to do. Okay, that's in there nice. So this essentially just runs down to here, as you can see. Now then, this is where this gets a bit awkward, because obviously it joins to that EMI filter, but it's the wrong side. So well, it's the wrong side from where we're facing. So what I like to do is just make sure that this is nice and flat up to the board. Okay, and then run it roughly to where we need it to go, which is here. And then just take a Stanley blade or a modelling knife or whatever you've got kicking round and just nip through it. There you go. Lovely jubbly. Okay, and then we've got the end of this. Okay, so I've just lifted that up from the board. Might go a bit blurry. Can't really tell, can you? You can't really see it. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in. I'm going to pop a little bit of flux on the end of that wire. Come in with a big soldering iron tip. It literally just shreds the enamel coating off the edge of that wire, like quicker than you can click your fingers. So it's a bit cumbersome, but it works quite well for doing this sort of job. And then I'm just going to pop some flux down on the pin for the EMI filter. And then I'm going to get my tweezers and my soldering iron. Like I said, because you're facing the wrong side of this, it makes it a lot harder than it would otherwise be. It is a sod. Let's try and push it down. There we go. That'll ding dang do. Okay, rinse and repeat to the other side. So I've got the end of the wire that I had before. So again, I'm just going to tin this up. So this time it's 2 pins across from where we've just been. So it's that one there. Well, there we go. That'll do. So same trick again. Gonna run it nice and flat as before. To roughly where we want it to be. And then again, come in here with the blade. That'll do. And then we get it back down here and solder it onto there. That's the plan. And because we fluxed, the end of everything up, there's plenty down there now just to help me along. Now this is where that hook tip will be coming in quite useful. Okay, done. Fantastic. And as you can see, we've got two nice wires there. One nice and flat, the perfect length all the way up to the HDMI port. And as I say, because I lie them along the length of the pin, they've got quite a lot of shear strength across the length of the pin, so that you get as much contact area between the wire and the pin as possible. That ground pin there is slightly over, but it should be okay. It's not touching, so we should be okay there. I'm not too worried about that at all. And then the others, that's pin 14 that's not used, so we don't have to worry about that. The others all seem to be okay, so yeah, that should be fine. Whilst that ground pin there does seem fine, it has walked across slightly. Now this is where I end up knocking this link wire off, and as I say, it is clear, so I could leave it, but there you go. Really fine little hook tip is brilliant for doing any fine adjustment like that. You couldn't do it with a conical tip, too big. But the rest of it all looks fine, all looks like it's soldered. So what we can do, we can give this a little bit of a clean now with some IPA. And this really is where, obviously, once it's clean, you can go ahead and give it a test. Now, hopefully, we're going to find that it works, and we're not going to have any more problems. But of course, if you do, then, and you're doing your own port, then it's important to sort of just stop, just take a step back and just have a think. Go away, have a cup of tea, read the newspaper, whatever you do, so just relax. And then come back, say, half an hour to an hour later, have some tea, have your dinner, whatever. Come back, and just have another look into it. Don't just dive straight back into it. Give yourself that little bit of thinking time, because you'll be amazed sometimes. You'll miss something daft, you'll miss a loose pin, or you'll miss a solder bridge. So we should be fine there. So what we'll do is we'll give this a test with a multimeter. Again, for anybody who's a beginner with this sort of stuff, I have covered this plenty on the channel before now. But again, just in case you weren't watching, and we'll do it just here. So the multimeter is in continuity mode. That is the mode where the two probes, when touched together, will beep like so. Hopefully you can hear that. Okay, so what we're going to do essentially is we're just going to go pin to pin and make sure that nothing's touching where it needs to be. Now, as I say, some of these pads underneath these pins were moving a little bit as I was trying to solder them, so I am conscious of the fact that they're not stuck in the board quite as firmly as they might otherwise be. So obviously we don't need any bridges further back underneath here, so it's best to check that now before we fire it up. So let's just see if we've got any short. So we're just going to touch one probe to one pin and one probe to the pin next door, and we're going to go all the way down, and here we're listening out for any beeps. That's because I've touched that, don't worry about it. Nothing there. Nothing there. Nothing there. It's because I touched it. Nothing there. Nothing there. Just notice the probe on the end of this left-hand tip is a little bit bent as well, which is not ideal when you're working with something this small. Okay, nothing there. Nothing there. Nothing there. Nothing there. Nothing there. That's pin 14. We're not bothered about that one. Nothing there. Nothing there. nothing there, and nothing there. Excellent. That's brilliant. So we've no shorts or anything there that we're concerned about. So we should be good to go. So as you can see there, we had 3 pins we've had to rebuild, and hopefully I've given you a tip there just to work down to solder to the backside of these EMI filters, because they can be a little bit tricky, like I say, when you're facing the wrong way. Just give this a clean up, because I forgot to give it a really quick splish of the old IPA before. Anyway, this will all get repasted and properly cleaned up before it goes back together, but for testing that'll do nicely. We'll stick some conformal coat down. So again, I've used this quite a lot, and this is the original pen I've had since I started the channel, and I had this a good few years before that as well, I think. Did I? Or is this, I can't remember if this is something I've had for probably the best part of 10 years, or if I ordered it about 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember. But MG Chemicals Overcoat pen in green, this one. As you can see there, the catalogue number, if you're looking for it, is P419DPGR. So essentially what this stuff does is, and I'm feeling confident actually, I'm just going to go for it. But essentially what you do is anywhere, so you can see like here, just here, so you can see where there's like bits of orange where the conformal coat, this green stuff's come off the trace. So what happens is, if that's left exposed, you can end up where over time, if it's in a fairly damp or humid environment, you can end up where the moisture in the air will actually come into contact with those exposed bits of trace, and they'll corrode it out and they'll rot the trace out from underneath. For anybody who's wanting to see a demonstration of just how bad that can be and just how nasty it can be, take a look at a video I've got in the description, which is on an original Xbox, so one of the old fat ones from the early noughties, that had some corrosion similar on an IDE trace to the hard disk drive. So that was getting an E07 because it couldn't communicate with the hard disk drive, and that was because a couple of pins had been rotted out from underneath from years ago when somebody had installed an old mod chip on it. And essentially, you know, it was the merest nick with a screwdriver, completely innocent by whoever had done it at the time. But over the course of sort of 15, 16 years, just rotted the trace out from underneath. And we found the damage, and we did repair it, and the machine itself is sat behind me. It does need a little bit more work doing, and that'll be coming up on a video in the not too distant future. Yes, so that is going to be making an appearance, because we do need to do some more work on that machine, preferably sooner rather than later. So essentially this stuff just drops out of the pen, sits over anywhere we've been working, and just fills it in. And as I say, anywhere where you've got exposed copper will just be covered up by that, and then effectively underneath it's hermetically sealed, so it doesn't, you know, moisture can't get underneath it now. It's well and truly in there. So you see there, somebody's scratched that ever so slightly, so we're just going to cover that up. There we go. Because at the end of the day, you know, these machines in, I don't know, sort of, well, a bit like the original Xbox, you know, give it 20 years time, you know, kids will be dragging them out at loft to have a play on what Dad used to play on or whatever. And yeah, unfortunately, you'll plug it in and it won't work because those traces have rotted out. Because a few years ago, when you fixed it, you went across the traces with a screwdriver with set tweezers, and you didn't realise. It's a git. And I tell you what, with the case, I mean, with these it's not so bad, but with the IDE tracers, oh my word, that was a nightmare. And that was big wire as well. I think that was the old enamelled wire I had. That was the old stuff, not the new stuff I'm using at the minute, which made that even harder than it would otherwise be. But yeah, there you go. So we'll give that a test and we'll see if it's working. Oh no. I'm really not sure how much of that you've just missed. I thought I'd hit start recording, and it turns out I hadn't. Right, so I will explain to you what I've just done. So, God almighty. So basically, when I went to reassemble this, I noticed that underneath, you'll see this, I'll tell you what, I'll show you on the good port. So you can see here, look. So these lumps are the leg of the HDMI port, and around it is a copper fill, which is on the motherboard. So the legs go through the holes, and then solder's placed in the hole to solder the legs and anchor them into ground on the motherboard. Sounds good, yeah? What can happen sometimes, if you don't do a particularly good job of removing the old port, is that the copper fill on the board gets ripped out with the old port. So what you end up with is, when you come to put solder back on the legs on your new HDMI port, you can solder to the legs because they're metal, but there's nothing on the board left for you to anchor them into. So the solder just kind of sits on top of the board because it's not soldered to anything, because there's nothing to solder it to. So you just end up with a glob of solder on the bottom of the foot, which doesn't really anchor it in, which significantly weakens the joint. So before, I really hope that's recording, it's just stopped of its own accord, but if it hasn't, what I'll explain to you is, essentially what we did is, because there's nothing left to solder to here, there's nothing to fill in. So what we ended up doing was, this area here is ground. All around these legs is ground. So all I did was I scratched away this conformal coat ever so slightly on this side all the way down, and the same on the inside edge all the way down on this end, and then just essentially filled in with solder across the legs to really give this a nice solid ground anchor again, because before it didn't have anything. You can see there, look, you know, somebody slipped with a screwdriver. Yeah, it's just not a very nice job of removing the old port, unfortunately, and that's the damage that can ensue. But if you find yourself in the same position, I'm just going to cover this with some more conformal coat, but now I've spotted it. But yes, so there you go. If you find yourself in the same scenario, there's some more there. So yeah, there's definitely some rippage going on this board when the old port was removed. It obviously wasn't up to temperature when it was removed from the board, and that's what's kind of done this, which is a little bit unfortunate, but nothing that can't be fixed. And if you find yourself in the same scenario, that's how you do it. I just wish I had the footage to be able to actually show you. Anyway, let's get it tested. And we still have a problem. No image. So, how can we test that? Okay, so I think you can just about see that that's the highest I can get up on the microscope. And I'm just going to test across these EMI filters, just to make sure we don't have anything going on there with those. Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's, oh, yeah, second one in is fine as well. Oops, no it's not. That's good. Alright, second pin in on the EMI filter to the third leg in from the HDMI port is fine. Nothing to ground. Okay, so next one. That one's ground. Next one. Okay, that's fine. So, and just here. Okay. Alright. Yeah. Yeah. So our EMI filters are fine, as they usually are. To be honest, they only normally get damaged in the event of something like a lightning strike or something similar. So I'm going to look next at this thing. This is the encoder IC. Sorry, not the encoder IC. Well, it is the encoder IC, but on Xbox parlance, this is a HDMI retimer IC. It does a very similar job. So basically, it does all the sort of HDCP, handshaking with display, picture format, color format, available resolution, all that sort of stuff. Negotiates that with your display, And then once it's happy, it chucks the picture out in full glorious high definition onto your TV. But of course, when it gets knackered, we know the EMI filters are fine. We've tested those. So essentially now it's down to one of two things. This thing, or what is sometimes termed as the booster IC, which is a little ST Micro electronics chip, which is over here. And essentially, you know, like on the, so it's this thing here. So on the PS4, for those of you who've been under there, you'll notice that there's quite a few like little diodes and things. Those are what they call the DJ diodes. You'll know exactly what I mean if you've been fiddling around with PS4 HDMI for any length of time. Well, essentially that little ST Micro IC does the same job as all those little diodes. But in this instance, again, you know, that tends to be fairly hardy. Not anticipating too much in the way of trouble from that. We look to have all the components and things on the board. We don't look to have any capacitors missing or resistors or anything from the circuit. So I am putting my money firmly on this. So I am at 500 degrees C, which sounds a lot, and 80 litres of airflow per minute. However, I'm going to keep, in fact, I'm going to drop that a little bit lower to start with. I'm going to go for about 70. And I'm going to be a fair old distance away from the chip, probably a good couple of inches, to be fair, to start off with. And that's the thing, you know, the temperature of your air station is kind of secondary. The important thing is that temperature you have the station set to is the temperature of the air as it comes out of the nozzle, yes. But it's not the temperature of the air 3 inches away from the nozzle. And that's the thing, you can control the heat by how far away from the circuit you have the wand. Now then, I've got this somewhat about 1.5 inches, 2 inches above the IC, and that's where I start from. So I put the flux down, we put the chip down, we've roughly lined it up, and like I say, I start a good portion away from the chip, and then gradually, I keep working the air round in circles, and then gradually get closer and closer in. So I'm probably about 1 inch above right now, and then I get down to around probably a couple of centimetres, and then I'll stay there then until I'm happy this has flowed into position. So once I'm happy I'm at a level where that's roughly sort of seated, what I'll do is I'll crank the air back up. So I'm going to go to about 110 litres, and then I'm going to come back in with the flux. Oops. Well, it was quite happily sat there. So we'll do that again. To be fair, I do have a little bit more flux down on the board now. So this should hopefully make it easy. I'm quite nervous now looking across at that stop record button to make sure that indeed I have pressed it. I have started the recording. Right, so air back up to about 110. My apologies if I block your view for a second, but this is going to reflow really quite quickly now. You should be able to see now the solder around the edge of that IC has gone molten pretty quick. So I'm going to put a tiny little bit of downwards pressure. Just going to nudge it, and it should dance around quite happily. Now that's miles out of position. So keep going. And once it is in position, you'll be able to nudge it, and it'll spring back. Hopefully, I don't know if you'd have seen that a bit there. Hopefully you would have done. Hopefully the wand wasn't too much in the way there. But essentially, once you've got it centered on all the pads, the surface tension will hold it. So you can nudge it ever so slightly and the thing will just spring back. And once you can do that, and it effectively, I like to call it dancing, taking one from Lewis Rossman there, you can essentially just make it dance on the spot. And once you've got that, you know that the thing is flown into position, or flowed into position even, quite nicely. So I'm just going to put a tiny drop of IPA on there, nothing too mega. Okay, we'll let this cool down and we'll give it a test. Ooh, okay, so we're going all the way on this one. So, the encoder, after testing, has no change on the scenario, which leads me to point to this thing. This is a PXD739. I'll pop the part number for this in the description of the video, but essentially, this little sod looks like it's the cause of all our problems. So essentially, we've been through this in a rather methodical fashion, and I'm fairly sure it is this little thing here, and it is tiny. This is the problem. So, okay, there we go. Yes, indeed, that tiny thing there is essentially a micro BGA. Yeah. And out of sheer desperation, I did once reball one of those. Yeah, I actually did. I was sitting there now thinking, you seriously didn't, but I did. And it worked afterwards, but I tell you what, I'll never do it again. So, yes, so these days I just make sure I carry some in stock. That way, so much easier. So, just going to give this a clean up. Okay, you can see there. Various pins and where they go. Now then, I'm just going to have to go rooting through my box for my spares. So bear with me for a second. If I remember right, they're on the top. Now then, blinking, you will miss these. These are terribly, terribly small. Okay. So as before, really, you've just got to line them up roughly where you want them. Okay. That'll do. And then, I'm just going to come in here. 70 litres of airflow per minute. And again, I'm going to do as I did before. I'm going to start nice and high. And I'm going to work my way down lower. Okay, see it downstairs as I nudged it? So you know you're good. Right. Oops, nudged you there. Same again then. Let's let it cool down. Oh, hang on, we've lost a pin. That'll be me being a clumsy sod with wafting the air wand around. Not looking where I'm going. Okay, so we drop that back on. Alright, let's give it a test. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so as you can see there, console is up and running. And there we go. Display, yes. There we go. So all along, the issue was our little ST Micro IC, a little booster ESD IC thing there. So essentially anybody who's floated around a PS4 knows those little DJ protection diodes. Well, that IC does a very similar job, just integrated into one neat package. But that's a rare fault. That's a rare one. It's only the second time I've ever had to replace that IC. Or is it the third? It's either the second or the third in all the ones I've done. So it's very, very rare. But if you're happy the port's good and your soldering's good and you're happy the retimer, redriver, the ESD filters and things, the EMI filters are good. It's the only thing that's left. So in that instance, get some of those chips, swap it over, and you too hopefully will have as much joy and success as we've had here. So thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and you found it useful. If you have, and this is a new one for the channel, then give it a thumbs up, and I would love you forever. And of course, if you like the content we share on this channel, and there's lots more to come, and there's some really interesting stuff coming up as well, then hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell to be notified of when I put that up. So thank you for watching. This Xbox has been a bit of a nightmare, but we've got there in the end. And I will see you next week for the next video. So until then, I hope life treats you well. Bye bye for now, and I'll see you soon. Many thanks for watching then, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then why not check out these recommendations below. Also, please remember to comment, rate, and of course subscribe to the channel if you found this useful. We've plenty more content on there, and there's lots more to come.